Hey there, fellowship. In the late 1980s, five of the greatest rock legends of all time came together to form an unlikely fellowship that they called the Traveling Wilburys. George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne of the Electric Light Orchestra made a record in 1988 that not only revitalized the careers of Bob Dylan and Tom Petty, who were at creative and popular lows at that time, but it also won a Grammy Award. The first song that they released was their biggest hit. It was called Handle with Care, and that's your challenge for this month. Let's get into it. So I have to tell the story of how the band formed because it's just so good. After the Electric Light Orchestra broke up, Jeff Lynne started producing other artists' records with great success. Now, one of these artists was the former Beatle, George Harrison. George's record label had asked for an extra song for an album he had just recorded that Jeff Lynne had produced. George happened to be in Los Angeles on business, so he and Jeff Lynne went out to dinner. Jeff brought along one of his heroes, who happened to be the great Roy Orbison. Over dinner, George asked Jeff and Roy to help him with this new song. They both agreed. Now, George had become good friends with Tom Petty, and he'd left a guitar that he wanted to use on the record over at Tom's house. So when he went to pick up the guitar, he asked Tom to join the band. And when they were ready to record, they found out that all the major studios in the Los Angeles area were booked at that time. So Jeff Lynne put in a call to his buddy Bob Dylan to ask if they could use the recording studio that he'd built in his garage. And so that's the story of how maybe the most illustrious supergroup in the history of rock and roll was formed. Okay, on with the song. So Handle with Care, and even the song's title has a great story. They were over at Dylan's house. He was out doing a barbecue for the band, and he called out to Harrison and said, "Hey, George, what are we going to call this song?" George looked around the garage. He saw a big package that had this huge sticker across it that said Handle with Care. And he goes, we're going to call it Handle with Care. You can't make this stuff up. The song's in the key of G. It's at 115 beats a minute. And the song has three main sections. The verses, which were sung by George Harrison and Jeff Lynne. A bridge section with the lyrics, "I'm so tired of being lonely," where Roy Orbison's voice just sounds hauntingly beautiful. And oddly enough, a second bridge that was sung by Bob Dylan and Tom Petty. The chords are pretty straightforward with one or two exceptions. And the strumming pattern, well, it's almost all up and down eighth notes. So let's learn this thing. The intro to the song has the same chord as the first half of the verses, so that's convenient. And it starts off with a D chord, and we're going to play it slightly differently than you might normally play it. We're going to bar the G, B, and E strings at the second fret with our index finger, and we're going to play the third fret of the B string with our ring finger. The reason we're doing that is because after playing 4 strums of the D chord, we're going to reach over with our middle finger and fret the C note at the third fret of the A string. And that C note, it's super important to the sound of the song. It always blows my mind how a little change like that one note can create such a different tonality and direction in the music. So we've got 4 strums on the D, 4 strums on the C with the, or D with C in the bass, and then on to a measure of a G chord, which gets 8 strums. So those two measures all together sound like this. That's a great sound. And now for the adventurous, here's another cool part to try. There's a little walk-up you can play on the last 2 beats of the measure with the G chord in it. The notes are the third fret of the low E, open A, then the second and third frets of the A string. So in my head, when I play that, I'm thinking of groups of 4. We've got 4 strums on the D, 4 on the D with C in the bass, 4 on the G chord, and then 4 single notes for the walk-up. So we go through that cycle twice, and then we're going to play a C chord for one measure, so 8 strums, followed by a measure split between G and E minor, so 4 strums each, and then a measure split between C and D. And the verse ends with a measure of G. So the bridge where Roy Orbison sings his amazing part is pretty straightforward also, but we do have one weird chord that we have to learn. We start off with 4 strums on a G chord, so 2 beats, and it's a little different voicing because we're going to try to strum just the low E, A, D, and G strings. And we want to fret the 3rd fret of the low E and the 2nd fret of the A string with our ring and middle fingers. We want to have our index finger free because in the second half of that measure, we're going to reach up and we're going to play the 1st fret of the D string with that index finger. Again, trying to strum just the low E, A, D, and G strings. So that weird sounding chord is called G augmented, and it's what we'd call a passing chord, which, although it sounds a little weird, it makes the melody flow really nicely into the C chord that we're going to play next. And we play that C chord for 2 beats or 4 strums, and then that's followed by D for 2 beats. We play those chords 3 times. And then that bridge ends with a measure of G. So that would be 8 strums, so it gets all 4 beats. Followed by a measure of G7. And that's going to take us into the second bridge. Now, the second bridge, where Tom Petty and Bob Dylan sing "Everybody's Got Somebody to Lean On," is super simple. We're going to play 2 measures of C, followed by 2 measures of G, two more measures of C, followed by 2 measures of D. And that D chord, well, that gives us a perfect transition back into the next verse. Let me play through this whole thing one time. Have a listen. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this song, it really is such a great song. The lyrics are wonderful, the vocal performances are fantastic. And although the instrumentation, it's pretty sparse, but it fits the song perfectly. There's also a great melodic slide solo by George Harrison, who frankly doesn't get nearly enough recognition for how lyrical and pretty much perfect his slide playing was. So I'm not going to put up tabs for this song, but I am going to give you all the chord diagrams you need and a chord chart for each section. It's a lot easier to memorize songs, especially when you're doing mostly strumming, to work with diagrams and chord charts versus 6 to 8 pages of tabs that you're trying to file through. So give this song a try. Once you start to get it down, it's nearly impossible to keep from singing along. As always, I look forward to seeing and hearing your videos. If you've got any questions, you can message me or post the questions down in Charlie's Corner. Have lots of fun with this one. I'll talk to you soon.